So perfectly honestly, I actually hated building a company the first time. I actually built it with one of my co-founders here, but I like to jokingly say that our thesis was Colin and Jamie build a company, which is not necessarily a product that the world is looking for. And after we got acquired by Google, even at the tail end of Looker, I was not like, you know what, I want to go build a BI tool the whole time. It was really actually going through the acquisition and sitting there for a couple years. We see this a lot where, a company gets acquired, the core thesis maybe shifts a little bit, the priorities shift a little bit, the people shift a little bit, not maliciously, but just because incentives are different. And after sort of sitting there for a couple of years, it was sort of just like, man, this product does need to exist, but now it almost feels like it has to, because the market is turning over in a way that sort of like this positioning is available. People were starting to leave, so I knew that there was talent out there that was going to be available. It was just sort of like the world sort of forced us to go do it, actually.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tycoon Talks. Today with us, we have Colin Zima from Omni. He is a CEO of Omni, and previously he served as the Chief Analytics Officer and VP of Strategy at Looker, and as a Director of Product at Google Cloud. During his time at Looker, Colin led product, analytics, customer success, support, and strategy. Before Looker, Colin served as the Director of Data Science and Business Intelligence at Hotel Tonight, which he joined through the acquisition of his startup, Primatable. Prior to founding Primatable, Colin spent several years as a statistician at Google. Statistician. Got it. I actually have not heard that term before. At Google, in a search ranking and as a synthetic credit structure EBS. So you have quite the variety of experience. Wow. And with us as well, we have Steven, our CEO of Database Tycoon, which is a data consultancy dedicated to helping small to mid-sized companies organize their data and take control of their data destiny. So to begin our conversation today, Colin, so first just give us the 411 on Omni. How did it get started and what was the original problem you set out to solve?
Yeah. So Omni's about 4 years old. The short background that is relevant is spent a bunch of time at Looker from very early days. I was actually one of the first customers all the way up through the acquisition post Google. Loved the product, built a lot of it. Huge amount of respect for a lot of people there. Actually, 70 out of 150 of us at Omni worked at Looker at some point. So
wow.
We can talk about that too. But there was always this frustration that I had, which is I appreciated a lot of the things about centralized sort of, enterprise BI, like data modeling, like code-based data products, things like that. At the same time, I started my career in finance and spent a lot of time in Excel. I love just sort of writing SQL on the side. And at scale, we saw so much Looker sitting next to Tableau or sitting next to Mode or sitting next to spreadsheets. And it was always like, this is sort of the sandbox area. This is the governed area. And the frustration was always like, why aren't these one tool? Why can't these things actually work together? Like we don't need an analyst writing SQL to be fighting the data team trying to govern metrics, because there's actually different use cases for these things. And so the very simple thesis was, can we actually bring all of these together in one product? So it could want you to both write SQL and spreadsheet and use AI, but also have governed metrics that are reliable, that are sort of, locked up. And that was like literally the thesis day one. And that is what the product is today.
Well, that's crazy. Yeah, I feel, a lot of products have, their long-winded journeys and iterations, but I really love that Omni is just stuck to the plot the whole time.
Yeah, pivotless.
Yeah, and, I can really relate. Pivotless, exactly. I can really relate to that feeling of, kind of working in a space for long enough and kind of feeling those pain points. And you talked about your journey going from user to, being part of Looker and then eventually going to form Omni. I mean, maybe I'm reading into it, but was it really just that sense of like, gosh, I know I could do this, differently, or I could do this better, or, taking all those learnings you had from Looker and trying to bring it out somewhere new?
So perfectly honestly, I actually hated building a company the first time. I actually built it with one of my co-founders here, but I like to jokingly say that our thesis was Colin and Jamie build a company, which is not necessarily a product that the world is looking for. And after we got acquired by Google, like even at the tail end of Looker, I was not like, you know what, I want to go build a BI tool the whole time. It was really actually going through the acquisition and sitting there for a couple years and sort of seeing the product start to, you just flounder a little bit. You know, like we see this a lot where, you know, a company gets acquired, the core thesis maybe shifts a little bit, the priorities shift a little bit, the people shift a little bit, not maliciously, but just because incentives are different. And after sort of sitting there for a couple of years, it was sort of just like, man, this product does need to exist, but now it almost feels like it has to, because the market is turning over in a way that sort of like this positioning is available, you know, like people were starting to leave. So I knew that there was talent out there that was going to be available. It was just sort of like the world sort of forced us to go do it, actually. I'm not a lifelong entrepreneur or anything like that. This is the only company I would be able to build. It just felt like it had to happen.
Cool. Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so kind of following up on that to give some more context and clarity to the Looker experience. So I guess could you say a bit more about like, you know, how the Looker experience, you know, and when you say it forced you essentially to build a BI again, like, you know, why?
So I think there's two parts. There's like the product that we needed to exist and actually sort of like the market timing. So I think start with the market thing because it's just a way higher level. Like this is actually sort of a repeat of what happened in the early 2000s with business objects and Cognos and OBIE, where, you know, like it's hard to build companies and you get to a certain state and, you know, the team gets tired and they're like, you know what, I'm ready to sell it and consolidate into something bigger. And usually as that's happening, like the market has adopted a way of doing work or like a set of products that exist. And slowly like startups and younger companies can start to sort of ply their way in. So I would argue like the first version of this was a lot of those companies turned over. They were very big around centralized BI, these really heavyweight tools. Tableau was this first PLG company ever that was like, we're a workbook on your desktop and now there's space for us to go exist. And it's a little bit different this time in that like sort of Tableau and Looker are different sides of the market. But I think at least from our point of view, while the landscape is diverse with sort of BI products, like the power players were sort of Power BI, Tableau, Looker, maybe to some extent Qlik, but Qlik got acquired by private equity also. And it was sort of this other moment where all of the companies turned over, all the management teams turned over, and users slowly started getting frustrated. Like, I don't think this happened the day that Looker got acquired or the day that any company gets acquired. But I think if you talk to the average Looker customer, you know, in 2018, there was a religion around it and sort of an extreme excitement for it. And I think sadly, when I go talk to the average Looker customer today, they're sort of just like, the product hasn't moved in 10 years. Like, what's the next thing? And so that was the market sort of positioning. From the product positioning, it really comes back to sort of this balance, which is there is a time and a place for slowing the organization down and creating control. Like, we don't want 10 different versions of customer. We want time zones to be consistent across all of our reporting. We want to make things simple for end users. So when they ask a question about, you know, like how many opportunities or how many customers did we win, they're consistent. They use the same definitions, things like that. At the same time, every time that you slow someone down, you're sort of stopping someone from making a decision in a completely different context. And so like a silly example of this was at Hotel Tonight. I actually made every single employee an admin of our Looker instance because at the time that was the only way to handle a piece of SQL. And it's because sometimes there wasn't time to go model the thing. Like, it was a weird one-off question. It was just like, go run this query. You know, like, it's literally not worth putting effort into this thing. You got your answer, you can move on. And it's tough to create a balance between these two things. Like, Looker's positioning was very much this idea, and I would argue all the centralized tools, like, your users aren't smart enough or aren't good enough to model data, so don't let them. Like, we'll put walls in front of them and they'll be able to self-serve. I'm overstating it slightly. And if you look at Tableau and Excel and, you know, notebooks and all the things on the far other side, it's sort of like anyone can do anything. If you're right or wrong, like, you're still learning something. And I think the reality is actually both are true. Like, there is low risk analysis and there's high risk analysis. If we're putting out financial statements and like we have a couple SOX compliant customers, like they need to audit their SQL over a 7-year time period or something insane. Like those metrics shouldn't change. If I'm doing product analytics on a new feature I launched, I shouldn't need the data team to like manicure DBT and build a perfect table. Like I just want to see how many people pulled up the new feature. And so the idea was really just this one of balance and sort of like pragmatism. And I think that's actually what's resonated well, is that kind of everyone does have these two problems. And inevitably you'll see people on both sides that are like, you know, I really like chaos, I just want to go. And you've got the sort of looker zealots that are like, you know, my data model is perfect and like it needs to look a certain way. But I think more people than we think are actually in the middle of like a bell curve.
Well, I was going to say, as I've been, you know, doing Omni for studying for the certification for the past month, and as a non-tech, well, somewhat technical, like let's say 20% technical user, like navigating the platform, like I must say, like I just think that you're just doing, like when you're talking about the bell curve, I think like the product just does such a good job of being able to like, you know, how the UI is great for the navigation and like, you know, being able to, I think it's more so that you're able to just kind of like break everything down and like see everything in like real time, but, you know, hide like the certain things from yourself that you're necessarily not, you know, you don't need to be working with in that model. And
exactly
kind of that brings me, yeah.
Just one comment I wanted to make before we move on to the next question. I can't think of how many times I've been working on projects in Looker where, you know, I go in there and, you know, I've worked on different types of projects in the past where I work on different levels of the stack. So, you know, some days I'm wearing the data engineering hat and some days I'm wearing the analyst hat. And, you know, you go into Looker and you realize that there's some model in there that you need that you don't have yet. Now you're like creating a to-do list. Okay, now I have to go back out to DBT, build it there, test it, run it through whatever process it needs to get run through, and then wait for it to get synced in, and only then can I even start experimenting. And I think just, you know, the approach you're taking with it, kind of like what Chloe said, it's so easy to just get in there and just start working with things and start trying things out. It's a real breath of fresh air, I have to say.
No, that's exactly it. Like there is a time where you should go do that and clean up your DBT model and like launch a perfect thing. And there's another time where you just absolutely shouldn't. And kind of everyone, it's just not even a controversial statement. It's just that every product kind of wants you to do one or the other. And just like, let's just do both.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and
totally.
I feel like, especially in this industry too, you know, everything is a niche. And I don't know if you were at Small Data, but Ben Stansel gave this amazing talk on the concept of vibes. And he quite literally used a bell curve to describe, you know, how we're shifting from over quantifying to just what is the vibe of the moment of what we are trying to actually express. And I think, like, you know, you have set out with a vision to just, you know, say something how it is and to show the world, like, you know, this is a problem and this problem can be solved. Yeah. And so I also had a question here about like, so how has that vision like stayed constant for you, even as this product has evolved through AI advances and, you know, even with new expectations for BI in the space?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is actually a pretty interesting one because we founded the company like a little bit after ChatGPT launched. So it wasn't like, you know, natural language was the vision for the product. I think at the same time, it's actually kind of a continuation of the core thesis, which is like, you know, spreadsheets are a way of writing a query, SQL is a way of writing a query, the UI is a way of writing a query, AI is a way of writing the query. And I think instead of being like, let's bring a completely different tool here with a completely different set of, you know, assumptions and data management practices, it actually just became another interface. And it's been kind of interesting because I was sort of telling the team today, a lot of the original thesis was there's a data model for everything. Like you can do everything in code, but you can also do stuff in UI above it. So we've already got kind of two ways of doing it. Natural language is really just an extension for a text box on top of the UI, on top of the code. And it turns out when they all fit together, instead of sort of fighting each other, you get these advantages of each. So like the examples I think that are most valuable in natural language are not where you sort of have to take the output of the prompt and you cannot touch it at all. So like anyone who's tried to do picture tuning, it's like extraordinarily frustrating because you're sort of like, keep this 50% of the picture, but change this 50% of the picture, and it completely rebuilds the whole picture. And that's what doing AI sort of from scratch is. is like you're trying to reprompt doing the whole thing. And I think our version of it is AI is just building the building blocks. So it's selecting fields out of the UI. It's building a visualization. But if I want to refine that object, the UI is actually a really nice way to do it. Like if I want to tune the fourth label of a chart, I could go ask AI to do it. But it's nice to have a configurator be like, click on this thing, tune this thing. And like similarly, if I want to change a join definition and have it sort of push through, or like subtly refine a field and make sure that, you know, returned orders are filtered out, that's something that you want to be able to do foundationally and have it propagate to everything, not at query time. And so I think, again, like rather than these layers fighting each other, we've sort of volunteered that like everything is our problem. And it sounds like a terrible company thesis. Like I kind of laugh every time. I'm just like, yeah, we're going to do everything. But I think when you sort of admit that everything is a good idea, it becomes more about how the pieces fit together than sort of like trying to push one religion versus another. So like AI was actually more of a natural evolution for us than anything else. It was just like, hey, this stuff is good. And like the last example I would give is I think that it enables people to be lazier in a very good way. So the example I'll give is like in Looker, you'd write a join in the model. You go in, you write YAML. You can build a UI for it that's like select from this. Now you've got like nicer autocomplete. You've got a UI building those things. An even lazier version of that is like join these two tables together. I won't give you the keys. You go figure it out on your own. But when you have all these building blocks underneath, it's pretty obvious that that's what the future looks like. Like I don't need to go tell, you know, Claude how to join the orders table to the users table. It can go look at the fields. It can go look at the cardinality. It can join them together. It could decide whether the join was good. We should be letting computers do those sorts of things instead of a user clicking 9 times. And so like, I think that is actually what the future looks like. It's just AIs are interfaces to every single thing that we're doing in the BI layer.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, it's a refreshing approach to BI because I found that working in BI, sometimes maybe compared with data engineering or analytics engineering, sometimes there can be sort of that blank canvas syndrome that you get in a BI tool where you're like, okay, I know I have all this data. I know what the customer is looking for, but how do I actually get from 0 to 1 here? Like, how do I get started? And, you know, I've started using LLMs in other parts of my job to kind of prompt my creativity in that way. So now to be able to do that in a BI tool as well, it's kind of nice to just be like, you know, of the tables, you know, you see like what analysis can you create and just see what it creates. And even if it's not 100% right the first time, it's still that guiding, you know,
I think that's exactly it. Like we've got to separate the risk of like pressing enter and sending the report to the CEO from the risk of like pressing enter, queue up what the work would be, review the work, and then send it out. And like almost every single thing that we're doing can have that type of action advance the things that we're doing. And so I think that's sort of our first level. And then it's like, you know, once the whole app is sort of LLM addressable, natural language addressable, now we can start building agents or whatever that can go do multi-step things. So now you can show up and say, you know, run me a cohort analysis and it's going to build a model and write joins. But like in every piece, we have all of the components that got built to go do that. So if there are foundational assumptions, we can actually reach in and adjust them. And that's like, I just think that's the right way to do it. So I think in some ways we got a little bit lucky, but I think that we actually have sort of the best product for doing all of these sorts of things.
And I want to kind of just hone in on one very specific part of this puzzle, the semantic layer. And so I want to ask you, like, you know, why have semantic layers, you know, become essential, and how you guys have approached them from day one?
Yeah, it's really because everything in data is about these building blocks. So I think the one thing that we did take away from Looker is, even though I want you to do the UI to do most of your coding or natural language to do most of your coding, you are writing code and configuration to go do things. Like we're defining fields, we're making sure that canceled orders are pulled out of the orders table. And again, like I think the analysis workflow is this sort of progressive one where sometimes you come from the bottom up and you build a DBT table that has removed the canceled orders, and great, you're good to go. Like all we're doing is picking out columns. I think that's actually the easy case, and a lot of things are much more nuanced than that. So if I just implement a product feature and I've got JSON and I need to parse those things out, we're kind of in a rough state if you have to make up how to pull out these features every single time. And there is structure to these objects. And really all a semantic layer is just the building blocks of queries. It's how do things join together. It's what things need to get filtered. It's what do objects mean. And when we create these sort of, more individualized components, we can take very, very complex concepts and actually still guarantee that things are permissed properly, that things are consistent, that time is applied correctly. And so kind of everything in the platform, what enables us to go from a Tableau style analysis to a Looker style analysis is we're putting these little semantic layer pieces underneath it. And so I think that's sort of the superpower that has let us deliver a good product. Obviously, there's a bunch of nuance. And frankly, I don't even really want people to learn our semantic layer because I want you to use the UI and natural language to go do it. But it's the configuration that's sitting behind it that lets you actually debug everything that's happening in the system.
Why do you think the market is now agreeing that the semantic layer matters? I feel like there's been kind of a shift where, would you suggest that Omni has put the semantic layer's importance on the map?
I don't think I don't think that we have done it, but I think for the people that know us well, I think that we have convinced them how important it is. It really comes back to I do this demo with natural language, which is pull up our sales reps and tell me how they're doing this quarter. It's it's a relatively simple query. What you realize though is in sort of business terms, there are things like this quarter that depend on the concept of a fiscal. And I know that sounds like the most trivial thing. And maybe we could go transform all of our data in the database to fiscal calendars, or we could write a prompt that goes and does that with natural language. But you have these foundational concepts that you really want consistency around. And when the business changes, you want to be able to make edits that propagate to everything that you're doing. So maybe we never had canceled orders. And then one day we start allowing cancellations or returns or gift cards. You need to be able to take that logical object and actually have it apply to revenue everywhere that revenue is used. And so again, I do think that LLMs can sometimes get this stuff right, and even they could mostly get it right. But the challenge is when you have to get it right, you have to pass it through some sort of intermediate like this, where you can actually understand what it's doing. And that's really all that a semantic layer is. Just a simple example is if I'm embedding out to my customer, so if I'm a SaaS company and I need to show reporting to my 100 customers, I can't mostly divide it up so that each customer gets their own data. Even a 99.9% success rate there is complete failure of that object. And so again, you could do data engineering and maybe solve that problem with schemas or something like that. But what a semantic layer is really good for is that level of indirection between sort of raw database querying and users. And I think that has just become obvious for people is, of course, we need something like that. And so I don't know, we could whip back. I reserve the right that we hit AGI and, AGI solves permissions in the data warehouse. It's nice to have sort of an SLA that is unbreakable, that is when Chloe logs in, she only sees where customer ID equals Chloe. It's so basic, but you need that for actually doing a lot of these reporting style use cases.
Stephen, I guess, what is your take on all this? What have you found in your time in the industry?
Yeah, well, I think I have been, skeptical but warming up to the semantic layer. That's my take on it. Where with Looker, I remember using LookML, and I think, would you say that is the early days of the semantic layer, the pre?
Well, you had semantic layers in XML back in the day with MicroStrategy, but Looker was definitely the first modern semantic layer, I would say.
I see. Okay. But I think, I understand the purpose for them. I have not often implemented them in my projects, but the thing that's changing for me now is with the use of LLMs and with tools like Omni, where LLMs have been embedded so directly. To me, whenever I heard semantic layer, I always thought, oh, the perfect use for this clearly would be some sort of, model that can parse languages. So, now that we're at that state where, as you said, LLMs are getting very good at reading semantic layers, I think that it's something I'll be advocating for earlier on now. Like, it's not just a matter of getting some good documentation in. It's a matter of like getting the semantic layer in, because we have to assume, we're in an LLM world now, and any project, whether you're using Omni or not, if you're an analyst and you have a DBT project, you have to assume that there will be tons of systems probably reading that, trying to parse things about that and make decisions off that. So semantic layer feels like the best solution to that so far that I've seen.
And I think another perfect example of this is it lets you sort of tie back to the UI. So if I say, show me all of our customers in North America, in the SQL world, I could get a giant SQL blob and I would get an answer. In the semantic layer world, I will get a set of filters in a UI that says customers.region equals NA. And then I'll get a UI attached to it. And I can click into that box and understand, what were the other options beside NA that it could have clicked? Did it miss the thing that it missed? That decomposition, it seems trivial because if things are right, it doesn't matter. But because they're not always right, and because users don't always understand what's happening, being able to decompose a query into what the filters mean, what the fields mean, is actually pretty meaningful for why is this wrong? Or why is it right? And so I think that's the power that has really become obvious with AI.
That cycle, when implemented properly, should help to reduce the friction between analytics teams, BI teams versus engineers or analytics engineers, where they don't have to constantly be sending requests back and forth to each other. Ideally, a lot of that info will be kind of pre-baked in there, and it's easy to know, okay, I'll just add that filter and, move on.
Yep.
And so I kind of wanted to pivot into this from a non-technical perspective for a second. What do these shifts really mean for customers? And on the technical side, what do they really mean for builders, the engineers, the people really working in the semantic layer? How does this actually change change these workflows? What do you guys think becomes, harder or easier? And I guess how do these choices really show up in day-to-day analytics work?
Yeah, I think I posted a chart of this on LinkedIn last week, but it's kind of actually just interesting to see how our company uses the tool, because there's some ground truth in how our employees use the product. And users clicking things in the pivot table UI, so what we call the workbook, was actually surpassed by the chat experience. And I really hate to be self-service is actually coming, because, BI companies repeat this every 5 years forever. But it is actually easier to do things in natural language. And I think that we're not going to start enabling, my sales team to go do high-level data science. Or if we do, that will be, 20 years down the line. But I do think what is getting easy now is just information availability. And if you kind of divide BI into two buckets, what I would call doing analytics, which is, data science, actually trying to tease out really interesting conclusions from data, and lookups, which I think get written off as completely solved because you just go into the source system and find the ticket for the company or whatever. I think the thing that is instantly becoming available to every single user in every single company is just trivializing lookups. And it's the same way where you go to Google and you're what year was the Eiffel Tower built? You could click into a web page and then scan the web page and go find the thing. Or it can just say, I'm going to embarrass myself, whatever year it was built, 1850. I'm probably very wrong there.
I don't actually know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we could go ask. But the general point is I think that stuff has become completely trivial. And so I see these use cases where instead of a sales rep walking into a meeting with a healthcare company and saying, yeah, we do healthcare, they can go to Omni, say, what healthcare companies do we have? And tell me a little bit about their use case, and walk in with 10 examples. And it sounds trivial because that data is available. They could have done it on their own, but the friction was actually going to get at that stuff was too hard. And so it wasn't done. And I think that is significantly changing. And so I think everyone is like that much more available at doing things. I think the hard part for data teams is some people are sort of fighting this future because AI is scary. They can be wrong. And candidly, I was in that bucket. Like, we weren't testing natural language internally until maybe 6 or 9 months ago. And it was because my point of view was sort of like, it's not smart enough. It's going to do a bad job. And it takes some work to actually implement, like getting it to use fiscal calendars properly. Like, it needed nudging and you needed to name things properly. But like probably 95% of my querying starts in AI now. And it goes back to like, I'm lazier and it can get me started and send me down a path. And then if I need to go unlock the UI to make it perfect or to do something heavier, I can go do that. But it's pretty fast to be like, who's the sales rep on this deal? You know, how much business is left this quarter? I would much rather write that question than like navigate a system, go find a document, do a thing, or like even worse is clicking 10 times. And so I think in a good way, we're letting people be lazier and do the things that they would be doing. And sort of, you still got the long tail of a BI tool sitting behind it to go do the next thing.
I just want to dig into one of the comments you just made there. You said that when you were thinking about adding LLM features to the tool, you were kind of skeptical at first that maybe the models weren't smart enough.
Yep.
You know, you're saying that was like 6 to 9 months ago, which in the world of AI is like light year, you know, a decade ago. Do you feel differently about that now with models like Claude Opus 4.5? And I think there was the new OpenAI model this week. You know, from my perspective, I think we're still a little bit away from code being able to, or LLMs being able to write perfect code immediately. But I think we're much closer than we were 6 months ago. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I think the quality is improving massively. I think our other learning was that we needed to create the right building blocks to do these things. Like, one example is just LLMs are still pretty bad at math. And I am shocked by the number of people that will walk up, drag in a spreadsheet of like 1,000 rows by 10 columns and be like, how much business did we do last week? And just hope that it one-shots the answer. Because quite frankly, like, the LLMs will make stuff up and they'll just skip rows and you'll be like, no, you're wrong. And then it'll say, oh, I'm right. Let me actually run a query on this data set. And it's where you need to learn the strengths of these tools, which frankly is language parsing and sort of decomposition. And then you need to build the component pieces that can actually do these things well. So don't guess what you think that column sums to. Write a query to go do that. And again, like, I think those are the types of things that as the models improve, we'll get lucky and it will just get better at doing those things. But we needed to build layers of the tool to actually enable those types of use cases. So like a really simple example that we taught it recently, we saw a lot of people that were coming in that were saying me, my team, and the tool had no sense of who the user was. So we need to build like a system so that it could pass in a bunch of metadata about the user. And now, you know, I can go look up my team or a sales rep or a sales leader and reliably get it to filter to the object that relates to that user. And so it's this combination of models are improving massively, but you do need to understand the kind of things that your tool does properly. And I think we see a lot of startups that are kind of just hoping that Claude solves all the problems for them. And I think we're taking a more sort of high agency approach, which is, we've got this magical natural language processor, but now we have to wire it up to the complexity of how an organization's data works and make sure that it reliably returns results.
Yeah. Okay.
And Stephen, a question for you here. So, you know, as the founder of a consultancy and as you, you know, begin to use Omni with our clients and different projects, like, how are you thinking about all of this?
Yeah, I mean, just all of the BI evolution in general.
Yes, more the AI, BI evolution.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel like everything is coming together to, I don't know, an inflection point in a sense where, you know, BI for years, you know, with other tools I've used, like with Looker and, you know, my earliest experience was with Power BI and like getting kind of locked into the Microsoft environment. And, you know, for years, I think BI has been very exciting, but not always incredibly useful. Like, it's useful to the right audiences sometimes. Like, certain managers need to see a certain set of KPIs, on a regular basis. But I think for the amount of effort that teams put into building BI and everything that leads up to it, you really want to put it into a tool that's going to treat it the way that it should be treated and actually surface those insights. And, I want to actually challenge how I'm talking about this, because it's not really like surfacing insights. That's kind of like, Colin, what you were saying earlier about the lookups. Like, there's the lookups, but then there's that whole other world of exploration where, if you're comfortable with SQL, then great, and you can go into a data warehouse and do that. But most people would rather not. And most people would rather use like one common user interface to see the data they have access to and do the experimentation work that they want to do, and ideally even push the code back. So, with tools like Omni, like, it's pretty exciting to think about trying to, learn it and use it more, because for the past decade, I'll say, the question on my mind has continued to kind of like cycle back of like, no one has really like gotten this perfectly, right yet. And like, I think everyone is kind of doing, Looker was a really great option for a long time because of things like LookLM, and because, I think Looker for a long time was one of the more innovative tools. But now, I mean, I think with Omni, you've really figured it out here. And, I'm excited about when we talk to our customers, Chloe, like, the things that we can tell them that they'll be able to do with this tool that I haven't been able to tell like clients I've worked. Oh, like, actually, we haven't really talked about this yet, but embedding is a really nice underrated feature. And, something as simple as, we want to be able to see our analytics on our own page somewhere. We want to be able to copy this and not have the user be totally locked in to that UI, that frame, whatever. These are nice features that customers will use, and I'm excited about getting to know them better and get to customize them and stuff like that.
And finally, I do have a meta question. So throughout this session, we have been talking about, the core problem Omni set out to solve and how AI has transformed it and, entered this product in a very harmonious way. But I have a question here. If let's just pretend that the BI landscape didn't exist entirely, there was not a huge market for BI tools, but there was a need for something that is a BI tool, right? How would you rebuild it? Would you go back and do the same thing that you did with Omni, or if there was no framework to work off of, then how would you approach that?
It's also, it's so tricky to think about, because I feel like our entire path has just been informed by, I don't think I'm a very creative person. I just am borrowing. I saw Excel and was like, hey, let's get a little bit of that. I saw Looker. It's like, let's get a little bit of that. Use ChatGPT. Pull a little bit of that. I think the obvious answer is just, I do think in a magical way, we're enabling users to be lazier. And I mean this in the most positive possible sense. I think that software engineers, data analysts, doctors, chat is just making it so that you've got a shorter path to the first answer. And I think that that's going to get driven into every single workflow and every single aspect of every app that we're using. So anytime you're on a page and you click more than 4 times, I feel like it probably could have gotten queued up with natural language as a starting point, and you still probably will have clicks as a follow-up. But I think that most of the apps that we're using, especially in work contexts that are high configuration, will become sort of natural language first and UI second. And that's probably the thing that is changing the most. I still think that you're going to have the whole app sitting behind it. In the same way that you had code sitting behind the UI, I think we're just going to have a third layer now. So it's language, UI, code. And I think that's how all products in the future will start to look.
Yeah, we're certainly trending in that direction already.
My last thought is, I think the hardest thing is people actually need to retrain how they do work. So example, last night, someone got stuck. They were like, why doesn't this code work? It was a Vega configuration. So someone was building a visualization. In the past, you'd sort of inspect the thing, try to figure it out on your own. I went in, copy pasted it into ChatGPT and was like, why isn't this working? And it was like, oh, these two variables are wrong. And there's no honor in like solving that problem on your own. The robots are really good at it. Like there's honor in knowing when you can use the tools. And I think that is the hardest thing, is just realizing where you can inject that into everything that you're doing. And so I think that's what data people need to be doing more, is like not trying to solve problems on their own because they're fun to debug. Like if the semicolon in our code could just be found, then it would just appear. And I think that we're going to be doing way, way more of that moving forward so that we can actually go put on our like thinking caps and do hard stuff.
I agree. And I think we'll even start to see like greater, shifts like this, and, not just in data, but in other sectors of tech as well.
Yep.
And so I think we have reached the end of our session. Before we close, Colin, is there anything exciting that's on the horizon that you want to share about Omni?
There's always exciting stuff on the horizon. What I would share is our horizon is about a week out. We post demos every single week of everything that we're doing. So if you go to omni.co and then click on demos, you'll see 10 YouTube videos every single week of everything that we're working on. And we've been doing this for 2.5 years at this point. We've got, I think, 1,400 YouTube videos. So you don't need to sort of take my word for what we're building. You can actually go see everything that we're doing at all times. And that's actually been a pretty amazing way for people to keep up with sort of all the progress.
Definitely. We will link that below. So for anybody watching here on YouTube, if you go to the description, that will be linked below. Colin, thank you so much for joining us today. This was such an interesting deep dive in the world of Omni. I actually did have one last question for you. Where did the Blobby come from?
I think one of our designers just put it together on a whim. There's a lot of like whim in the product. So I think that was just created because we like needed something on the page, and then we turned around. It's like the same way we became Pink. We went to the Snowflake conference and wanted to stand out, and Tam made us pink t-shirts, and then we became a pink company. So we're definitely a like fall down the hill type.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, because I just when I was in the workshop you guys did at Small Data, I was just in awe of how many variations of blobbies there are. There's a blobby for everything. And like they were telling me that that's not even the full collection of blobbies, and there were like 100 blobbies in this repo. So yeah, and I have so many blobbies stuck onto various items of mine. So I love the blobby. Very nice.
Love it.
You make the tool feel pretty fun, I have to say. Like it's nice to be able to go in there and see some, spark of joy in there.
So whimsy, because what is the point if we, we build all these things and we can't have fun,
Exactly.
So Colin, thank you so much for coming to join us today. And thank you, Stephen, as well. For those of you watching
Great speaking with you, Colin.
Yeah.
Of course.
And for those of you watching in YouTube, you can connect with Colin and get the links to the Omni demos. And yes, and we will see you guys next time on the next episode of Tycoon Talks.
Last thing I say before we close out is if you're interested in Omni, or if you're working on any other kind of data tool expansion in your stack, please reach out to us at Database Tycoon. We work on a variety of different projects, and we're, open to chat. So please contact us. Thanks, everyone.